Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the CommVault breakout session here at reInvent. As you can see from the title, today we're talking about automating backup and archiving with AWS and CommVault. Just a brief run-through of what we're going to be presenting today in terms of the content. A really quick intro to who CommVault is and what we do to give you some context. A little bit about the technology specific to AWS. And then I'm really going to focus on some use cases and customer examples of how people are leveraging our technology specifically with AWS. We may, if we have time, have a little bit of time for questions at the end, but if not, there's a number of CommVault technical and also people from our product marketing team available at the CommVault booth, and we'd be more than happy to handle any of your questions. Very quick legal disclaimer that our corporate legal people force us to put up on this one, but just to protect myself and in terms of any futures that I may inadvertently disclose in the context of this presentation. So CommVault, really quickly, as a vendor, where originally we were part of Bell Labs, AT&T, spun out of AT&T as part of the Lucent Group in the mid-90s, and effectively since then have gone on a journey where we've really pioneered a lot of things in the data and information management space. So we're 100% software. Okay, we're not aligned to any specific infrastructure or vendor, and we focus on the disciplines, the data and information management disciplines such as backup, archive, replication, analytics, and also some search and e-discovery capabilities, and it's all built on a single platform. We are one of the fastest growing vendors in our space, and the organization is 100% CommVault built technology, so no acquisitions, 100% organic growth. My role at the organization, I'm the chief technologist for our cloud solutions group, and that's a group of about 80 odd people globally that are 100% focused on cloud and service provider organizations that we work with, partner with, and help our customers to leverage our technology based on that consumption model. We are an advanced technology partner with Amazon for the backup and recovery, archive, and also disaster recovery disciplines, and we fit under their storage competency segment of the APN program. This is just a high-level view of our technology, and I guess the key piece, again, just a reminder, we're 100% software-driven, single platform approach. Okay, so one lot of infrastructure with the ability to go and service multiple data management disciplines. But because we're not tied to infrastructure specifically, we can actually be deployed or coexist on multiple different infrastructures. So whether that's physical, virtual, hosted private cloud, or even public cloud, we have the ability to span all of those environments. We can run in our entirety in any one of those environments, or we can help customers, and probably one of the biggest pieces of value we add to people leveraging AWS specifically is that we really help to manage those transitioning workloads. So the ability to manage data and infrastructure on-prem and through that journey, through that life cycle to the cloud, including managing workloads in the cloud. And that transition that many organizations are making from traditional on-prem solutions through that hybrid capability and potentially all the way to the public cloud. Our content store philosophy is we support a whole bunch of storage platforms through our content store. And content store is that single view or virtual repository of data. So we might have many copies on many different storage infrastructures, but it gives you that single pane of glass, that single piece of visibility across all of your data assets under management from CommVault. Again, a big differentiator from us, and to give you some context, this is not a all-encompassing list, but it's got the majority of storage technologies that we support. Really, our philosophy here is leverage the right storage based on the SLA, cost, importance, capabilities that you're trying to deliver. So whether that's snapshot or replication based, and you can see the huge list of vendors that we support there. That's upwards of about 80 odd different arrays where we can actually control and manage their snapshot capabilities, catalog that, and then lifecycle that data, through a tiered storage process to effectively any other piece of storage that we can mount or write to that's on this list here. So whether that's your open, SAN, NAS, direct attached storage, even appliances. You know, we support lots of appliances. But one of the things that CommVault's been a leader in terms of our innovation, and especially the number of vendors that we support, and we were one of the very first vendors to support technologies like Amazon S3, is our ability to write to cloud storage and object storage specifically. The benefits of being able to choose so many targets, one classic example I can give people, most of you will have probably heard of a while back now, Navanix actually going underwater. We helped a lot of our customers who'd written data to Navanix to actually make subsequent copies out to AWS, leveraging some of the networking capabilities between data centers and move lots of that data off into AWS. So people have often been concerned about security, lock-in to certain providers and various other components. CommVault really helps you in that sense that if we can write to a tier of storage, we can also copy out of that to any other tier of storage. So even things like legacy tape and various other infrastructure that's potentially on site, we can help you with your process or your journey to the cloud from that perspective. So really managing that transitioning workloads. Just an example of where that statement, choose the right tier of storage based on the SLA, the workload, the recovery types that you need to service for your organizations. This is actually an example from it's a CommVault customer. We've pulled these reports or pulled this data out of our systems, and it's based on the frequency of restores based on the age of the data over the last 12 months. So as you can see, there's a huge amount of restores that happen within the first 7 days of the life cycle of that data, and over time, the frequency of those restores becomes significantly less. And that's where you can start to leverage the economics of cloud and cloud storage specifically, that as that data becomes less frequently used and the likeliness that we're going to recover it becomes less and less, you can start to tier through those storage devices that may be external, potentially lower performing, certainly lower cost, and continue to manage that through the life cycle. So rather than pay the 10, 11 cents per gig for a 7-year retention, you can really start to tier that data off. Leverage technologies like not only S3, but also things like Glacier for that stale data to really reduce the cost profile of having to manage that data through its entire life cycle. Depending on your industry, especially the much more regulated industries, healthcare is a classic example where in some cases it's infinite retention kind of policies. You really need to think about what's the cost of storing that data over its entire life cycle, and that's where the benefits of cloud and providers like AWS certainly really come into their own. So some of the deployment models that we service and some of those examples tied back again to use cases, we're seeing more and more organizations either leveraging workloads in the cloud, okay, net new workloads. It's also becoming very much the dev and test and disaster recovery platform of choice. The days of provision a second fully burdened data center for disaster recovery and manage all of those costs for the just-in-case kind of scenario, people are leveraging the economics of cloud and the ability to provision and burst and manage all of those capabilities for instances like disaster recovery, like dev test, those short-term workloads that we are able to go and drive that. We've spent a lot of time working with in hosted environments, in private cloud environments, which are becoming far more prevalent on the customer prem and also in hosted private environments, and also that hybrid in between. For a lot of people, there's no one size fits all. It's the appropriate cloud for the appropriate workload. And as a result, because we're 100% data focused, if you look at any piece of data in your environment that has value, any application that requires uptime, it doesn't matter where it's located, it needs to be protected, it needs to be recoverable, and that's really where CommVault fits in. So some of the use cases are specific to AWS. The most common one, and we've been doing this for a long time, as I mentioned, we were one of the first vendors in market to support S3 capabilities, the ability to write to that. The way that we did it was slightly different to a lot of vendors. So it's not a dedicated appliance. It's native to our media agent capability, and effectively, whether you're using a physical or virtual media agent with CommVault, again, we're a software provider, you have the ability to, via our cloud connector, connect to AWS, put in your credentials, and tier additional copies off to the cloud. More and more commonly, we started to see requests for how do I manage workloads in AWS? And that was twofold. One, originally it was the management infrastructure remaining on the customer prem, but managing those workloads in AWS. Now we're seeing more and more organizations deploying their entire CommVault infrastructure in the AWS cloud, managing things between regions, through different zones, and it's a really powerful proposition, and the ability to go and basically leverage enterprise-class data protection, data management software, but fully housed within the public cloud environment. And we also see some use cases for organizations that want to service data from AWS, either in a cloud-to-cloud model or cloud back to client premises. It's probably the least common use case, but certainly from a CommVault perspective, if you've got IP connectivity and we can talk CommVault protocol to CommVault protocol, it actually doesn't matter where that is. We've seen some examples. In fact, we've got an organization leveraging our technology where they protect data from Office 365 with Microsoft to the AWS cloud. Those capabilities exist within our software as long as our communication protocols exist, as I mentioned. So talking more specific to AWS and really a summary of our capabilities, CommVault's very well-known in the market for our backup and recovery capability especially. We've been a leader in the Leaders Quadrant for the Gartner Magic Quadrant for the last 4 years in a row. Okay, we're a leader in the Forrester Wave for enterprise backup and recovery. But what a lot of people don't know about CommVault is that we're more than just backup. And as an example of that, where we focused on our AWS support is around things like, firstly, provisioning. If you think about recovery in the cloud or recovery of any data, the first task that you need to do is actually go and provision a target that we can go and recover to. The very first word in the title of this presentation was around automation. How do we automate this? We can go and configure policy-based provisioning of AWS assets. And that means you can also tie them back to security roles. So for certain types of workloads, for certain types of staff within your organization, they might have a security role tied back to a policy that says, for, let's say, someone on the dev team who wants to go and provision something for development and testing, we're going to limit them to a certain class of instance so that they're not provisioning things like an I-class instance with provisioned IOPS and all of those kind of things that potentially rack up a pretty decent bill, and it's more compute and more power than they actually need. So you can start to lock these kind of things down. There's two use cases here. I'm provisioning a uni workload which I'm going to manage, or I'm provisioning a workload for recovery. Both of them can be automated through policy. Okay? From there, we also have an ability to go and control, initiate, tear down, create, but ultimately manage snapshots from the EBS volumes. Okay, so from that same provisioning tool, we can now go and create snapshots in a very simple, easy-to-use interface. It's a web interface where we can go and drive those snapshots. Really, really simple, gives you that base level of protection for your AMI instance. Again, we're most well known for our backup and recovery capabilities, but if we're talking lifecycle, we're talking that point in time, and also the ability to get that granular cataloged capability, tiered data off to the appropriate tier of storage. That's where our traditional backup and archiving capabilities would apply here. And again, the ability to write directly to an Amazon S3 library with no VTLs, no specific proprietary appliances that need to be deployed, and most importantly, cost you more money. Okay, this capability, and again, part of the provisioning process, it's not just the ability to go and provision an instance, but it's provision, deploy the CommVault agent, register that with our master server, and then, with all of that catalog information, be able to go and connect to the appropriate storage based on policy and automate that entire process based on schedules, retention, everything that you require. And last but not least, the ability to go and vault or tier that data off, again, to the most appropriate tier of storage. So for your long-term retention, your compliance data, often referred to as dark or stale data, that's where we have a capability to go and tier data off into Amazon Glacier. One of the things that we've implemented as a best practice at CommVault, and I'll cover this in a bit more detail in the next couple of slides, is with deduplication, setting a lifecycle policy on your primary S3 bucket is no longer what we consider best practice. Not all data belongs in Glacier, and Amazon will tell you this as much as CommVault. If you've got data that you need to restore frequently, you need to touch, that's not what Glacier was built for. And so the ability to go in with CommVault's copy processes, actually move the relevant data to a new S3 bucket, configure a more aggressive lifecycle policy on that, and push just the data that needs to go into Glacier into that copy is now what we consider best practice. All tracked, all managed, all available for recovery. So a little bit more detail about our Amazon S3 support and some of the differentiators that we feel we have over some of the competition in the market. So two things to point out. On the left-hand side of this slide, whether it's your traditional client server that's on the customer premises, maybe in a service provider's prem, physical or virtual, our media agent code can deploy there. Whether it's an Amazon client based up on an EC2 instance, our code can deploy there. So you have an ability to run, in hybrid situations, that to the cloud situation from customer prem, or as we've mentioned a couple of times, we can run our entire workload up in AWS. I've actually specifically called out the C3 instance class, which again, we have what we call a building blocks guide. Building blocks is our best practice reference architecture based on size, performance, scale, all of those kind of parameters, where we make recommendations on right-sizing infrastructure for the workload you're trying to handle. So the most common instance type that we will use is a C3 instance. The way that our process works within CommVault, again, this is natively supported, so no VTLs required, no dedicated appliances with that proprietary nature. We have an ability to multi-stream jobs, okay? So not multiplex, which is a more traditional way to get better backup performance, but actually run multiple streams in parallel. And by breaking up those streams, we can optimize for greater performance. We also have an ability through a process that we run on our media agents to leverage the multi-part upload capabilities. So we pre-process all of the data, put it in an optimal size, optimal format to write to the S3 library, and if we're pushing multiple streams, we can do a lot of that in parallel. So we can get some pretty impressive throughput in writing to these S3 libraries and drive lots and lots of data into there. These are tunable parameters. There's no one size fits all. It really does depend on what you're trying to achieve as to how we can tune that. And we have field guides and best practices and really detailed information on how to tune the read and write performance of writing and leveraging the S3 storage capabilities with CommVault. Glacier support, I think one of the things to really call out, we've now started to define a lot more of best practice around Glacier as it's becoming more adopted, but we've also learned some lessons the hard way. As I'm sure you can appreciate, the economics of Glacier look really, really attractive, but also what you have to understand is that not all data belongs there, and if you do a wholesale restore of everything, then that's going to come with a bill as well. So use Glacier for the right purposes, and it's a fantastic technology, and the economics of it outweigh anything else that certainly we see in the industry. So again, to reiterate that point from before, our best practice recommendation is to create a new S3 bucket with the lifecycle policies enabled. Because you're just putting the relevant data into that bucket rather than the entire collection, it means you can set a much more aggressive lifecycle policy to tier that data off to Glacier. Again, Deduplication can add complication in some of these sense. You want deduplication for moving data over the WAN. You want deduplication to optimize how much your storage footprint that you have on a technology like S3. But when we start to tier this data off into Glacier, intermingling all of that data together and having reference blocks isn't necessarily the right use case for that. So typically, not all the time, but typically what we would see is give someone the ability to go and rehydrate that data. So take it out of its deduplicated form and put it back into more of a native jobs-based copy. But the other capabilities that CommVault adds, you've got multiple different copy types within CommVault. So you can have what we call a synchronous copy, which means take everything from copy 1 and put it in copy 2. That's typically not what you would do in this scenario. What you would typically do is more of what we call a selective copy, which might look something like, give me the weekly SQL fulls, right, and only the weekly SQL fulls, copy them down to that library, and then we'll keep them, because that's the data we need to keep for tax purposes or compliance purposes or whatever the use case may be. We also have a capability that I'll explain on the next slide that's for unstructured data that we call reference copy. Reference copy is basically a query engine against our own jobs. So rather than being that jobs-based, copy process, we can go and query against everything in our repository and effectively, based on classifications of data that could look like AD user or group, creation time, file type, and even content. So give me every PDF owned by the HR department containing these keywords, and I'm going to go and make a special copy of them and go and lock them into a long-term retention. Really, really flexible, really powerful from that perspective. So again, it's multi-part upload, copy that data out. This all would happen up within the confines of AWS. Okay, so you wouldn't drag that data back over the WAN and do that really long loop. You would deploy and potentially go and provision a media agent in the cloud just to service this particular purpose, make this special copy, and then tier the data off to Glacier. Best practice from a CommVault perspective, and the best way to optimize your spend and manage your data within an AWS environment. Completely policy-based. So the hardest part in deciding how to set this up is actually typically getting the business to agree what's the policy, what's the rules. The technology is always the easy part. But it's all policy-driven, it's all automated beyond that point, and it just continues to happen time and time again until such time as you decide the policy needs to be adjusted or changed based on your business requirements. And of course, then we go and drive that data off into a Glacier archive. Fully tracked, fully managed through its entire life cycle, recoverable, and available through the CommVault GUI. Excuse me. So again, I'm trying to keep this as use case focused as possible. We like to show as many examples of how customers are using our technology specific to Glacier. There's a number of different examples here. They span from endpoint protection, so desktop, laptop, mobile, handheld devices, all the way through to your more enterprise kind of protection requirements in that sense. The first one I'm going to cover off is endpoint protection. So this is an example where all of the CommVault management and data movement infrastructure is actually running up in AWS. We've got those remote mobile users, remember, typically smaller workloads. So rather than have to go and write to some on-prem equipment, typically these are users that may be scattered all over the world. An advantage of leveraging a provider like Amazon in this sense is we have lots of organizations that we work for that are truly multinational, global by nature, but they want to keep the data as local to the users as they possibly can. So users in Singapore go to Singapore, users in Tokyo go to Tokyo, users in the US remain in the US, all of those kind of things. You have an ability to truly leverage that kind of capability with an organization like AWS and their deployments across the world. So the ability to manage that centrally, provide on-demand self-service for your users. Scheduling a backup for a laptop user, especially across multiple time zones, near on impossible. How CommVault does it is we have what we call opportunistic scheduling, where, again, automated and based on policy, you decide what thresholds need to be met for a backup to be initiated. Okay? CPU, memory, utilization, bandwidth, whether it's on a secure network, any of these kind of parameters can be set, and then the data, quite simply, is driven, in this case, into an S3 repository and protected. Right? The user has an ability to self-serve recover from this portal. They can also deploy and manage multiple laptops, if you like, or multiple devices through this self-service capability. An example that we're starting to see more and more requests for is, and I've actually done this myself, so I accidentally, a couple of years ago, left my laptop on a train in Tokyo and watched the train pull out of the station and pull out and effectively lost my laptop. But through the use of our technology and still having access to the internet, I was basically able to serve up this portal and then go and recover my presentation to take to the customer that we were going to at the time and still be useful, still be effective. But one of the things that we constantly get asked for, if I've lost a laptop, just like your iPhone, just like your Samsung and your Android phones, the ability to go and you've lost some potentially or exposed some potentially critical, business critical data. So from a CommVault perspective, we have an ability to go and hit that portal, remotely lock down that machine, or completely wipe that machine the next time it comes online. Okay? And one of the things that we're starting to be asked for is recover to a VDI instance, or in the case of Amazon, recover to Amazon workspace, right? So I can provision and recover the data and have the user, productive again in far less time than I can ship them a new laptop and go through that entire process. Yes, we're probably going to need to do that down the track if that's the preference of their device, but it's a productivity capability that we can go and deploy this kind of capability in the cloud and recover from there. Another very simple use case, and I'll give you a personal example on this one. I switch between a HP laptop and an Apple MacBook Pro, right? And keeping my files in synchronization and also keeping within the company policies around third-party cloud-based, sync and share kind of capabilities, CommVault has built this capability into our technology. Enterprise-grade, secure, managed and controlled by policy, by corporate. I have an ability to set up my two devices and basically sync and share through a self-service portal, decide which folders get synced and shared and managed in that process, and I can always keep my two devices in sync. It's a really powerful capability. So I can, from my perspective, I can pretty much pick up my Mac or pick up my HP laptop and walk out the door and be pretty comfortable that I've got everything that I need to continue to do my job. The sharing capability, how do we collaborate, right? One of the things that, and we've done this ourselves at CommVault in the past, where we used to use technologies like Dropbox. It became rather than email the big attachments around like everybody used to do, we were using things like Dropbox to go and share these kind of capabilities out. Now we have an ability within our technology to go and assign the appropriate permissions and sharing capabilities so that people can come and get access and collaborate and view this data. It's a really powerful proposition. And again, all of this infrastructure can be run in the AWS cloud. So moving on a little bit to more server grade or enterprise class deployments. This is, again, CommVault infrastructure running in the AWS cloud and protecting instances that actually exist up in that environment. So one of the things that we're starting to see more and more of, we did some surveys recently of our customer base about public cloud use and their actual use and protection requirements around enterprise applications. So by that I mean things like Microsoft Exchange, Microsoft SQL, Oracle, all of those kind of applications. So the ability to have an application-aware, application-integrated protection capability that's enterprise class, and again what we're known for, and the ability to run all of that infrastructure in AWS makes it a really legitimate choice from a CommVault perspective to go and run those production enterprise workloads and have them protected as you traditionally would on more of a physical on-prem kind of deployment capability. Stretching that out to manage workloads that exist outside of AWS and workloads that exist in AWS, what we typically see is an ability to go and deploy some on-site infrastructure. Okay? The physics of the WAN often get in the way, and not for protection. Right? Deduplication allows you to cheat on getting data in and getting data over the wire. But recoveries and recovery SLAs is what you need to think about in this kind of deployment model. So again, our best practice recommendation, write data down to a local copy for that short-term retention. Right? It It keeps your backup windows short. It makes sure you're protected. It gives you a local on-site copy of data for a period of, a time window that you decide. 14 to 30 days is a common, kind of recovery cycle. And then from there, we can leverage our dash copy process to go and actually move just the unique blocks of data. So dash copy is like a replication job, but it's deduplication aware copy. And the reason we differentiate, replication typically means if you've got a 30-day retention on side A, you need a 30-day retention on side B. With CommVault, because we do a copy process that's deduped optimized, it means I can have 30 days on side A and 7 years over on side B. So you can decouple those retentions and leverage the appropriate cost model for you based on your SLA. This is just a really quick example of an organization, the Signature Group. They're a services partner to CommVault, excellent organization, and they've been leveraging our technology for quite some time. And just a quick quote from them, and it's tied back to some of the use cases that I just walked you through. Again, we've covered most of this in the previous slide, but just to show you the extension that, from that lifecycle process, taking data from on-prem, short-term retention on-site, what we might term medium-term retention in a technology like S3, and then the ability to vault that longer term out to Glacier. Completely policy-based copy management and automated from end to end. So set up that lifecycle management policy and your ability to drive data through that, and you're protecting it in the appropriate manner for your organization based on the appropriate costs and SLAs. So one of the things I mentioned earlier was around reference copy, that ability to go and query and target the specific data and data types that you want to make that special copy for. So some of the analysis that we've done on this is, you take that traditional mountain of data and synchronize every copy, especially out to a tape technology. It's duplication upon duplication of the same data over and over again. So CommVault gives you the ability to go and target that relevant data, and what we've seen in terms of results from lots of our customers, that it can reduce up to 70% of your retention costs because it's targeting just that specific data. How might this be relevant to you? Imagine somebody's, an example I come across quite often. Imagine somebody's gone and dumped their iTunes library in an inappropriate folder, and it's mixed in with your HR and your finance data and everything else. It shouldn't be there, sure, but the ability to go and filter out just the stuff that matters and not pay per gig per month for stuff that doesn't is really the power of a technology like reference copy and the ability to go and deploy that. Automated provisioning and recovery. So earlier on, I gave you the example of that, net new workload. Let's go and provision a new instance, ensure that we've got our agent there for protection, and we're managing the snapshot capabilities. This is more focused on recovery to the cloud. As I touched on before, you've got to have something to recover to in order to be able to drive that process. And having this policy-based and the ability to automate it, you could potentially, with our workflow capability, go and automate a disaster recovery scenario end to end and make it as simple, if you've got it defined enough, make it as simple as come in and run or schedule a job to go and actually do all of this. So it's, your typical disaster, the amount of use cases we heard after events like Sandy, for example, Hurricane Sandy, various others. I've seen lots of them in my time that I spent in Asia Pac before relocating to the US. Floods, tsunamis, fire, think of your disaster. Power outage is actually the most common form of declaring a disaster. In that particular case, the ability to go and provision on demand a pre-configured from policy AMI instance in the cloud and then drive recoveries to that. And again, the ability to automate that process end to end if you've got your business rules and your business processes defined enough. So take out the old traditional run book of 1,000 pages that you need to follow click by click and throw that away, define that process, build it into an automated workflow, and then go and automate that recovery process from that point on. And one point, sorry, just on the previous slide, it increases productivity. You can start to offer some of these capabilities on demand. Potentially it's a departmental thing, it's not an organization-wide capability. So you can give them the appropriate permissions, you can give them the appropriate capabilities based on policy to go and do this. You're only using resources on demand, okay? So you're not wearing the burden of cost for your traditional DR center. We've got a DR test that we can now automate and prove once a quarter. The amount of people that are meant to do DR tests and just simply don't do DR tests is astonishing that we talk to in our space. The ability to go and automate that, have reporting and alerting that says we've done it, we've achieved it, we've proven it, and then tear those assets down as soon as you're no longer using them and not wear that burden of cost is really, really powerful. From my homeland in Australia, an example from the University of Canberra. So they, I'm actually quite familiar with this, this requirement. They actually run out of power based on the segment that they were in to effectively build more data centers, build more capability. They're surrounded by lots and lots of government entities. They get the priority over data center space and power and various other things. And so they started to look outside of that framework for what they could leverage. AWS was their provider of choice, and we've worked with them actually to define a disaster recovery and recovery capability, which longer term they intend to use for dev and test workloads and various other things, disaster recovery being the priority. But the ability to go and automate that, provision that, leverage that capability in the cloud has been extremely powerful for them and got them out of build another data center, buy more infrastructure, continue to try and service that with a whole bunch of people. So last couple of slides to sort of wrap this up. Where does CommVault differentiate? If you look at most organizations and what needs to be achieved through those organizations, even if I just look at data protection alone, there's many organizations out there that will have sort of their work group remote site solution, their enterprise solution. Then maybe we've got something, an application that's pretty tricky to back up, like a SharePoint or something like that, that you go and look at another point solution for. CommVault has all of those capabilities in a single product, single platform. So less training, less infrastructure, less integration, and far easier to automate because you're automating the entire platform and leveraging that platform for automation rather than the different capabilities of multiple different products. As we expand that out, endpoint protection. It's been a cloud-based delivery model for a really long time. So having those capabilities and not necessarily having to leverage a third-party product like it's been done in the past, now you can combine your endpoint protection strategy with your endpoint protection strategy under a single product. Continue to expand these use cases out. Disaster recovery. How many organizations use a different DR replication or recovery technology from their enterprise backup and recovery capability? Effectively, you're moving the data twice in most instances of that. So CommVault's ability to go and combine and net that down, single infrastructure, single pane of glass for operation, one set of training, one lot of provisioning, is a huge advantage over multiple point products to achieve the same. Archiving. Again, not all data needs to sit on expensive primary storage for the rest of its days. Leveraging things like the economics of cloud, storage especially, to go and tier that data off for longer term retention and then potentially spin up some assets for things like e-discovery and search analytics against that data is, again, a really powerful prospect from a single pane of glass. If you've got multiple point solutions and an inability to go and service those from a discovery perspective, really, really challenging. If you had, compliance requirements, FRCP, any of those kind of examples that exist where you need to go and do a discovery exercise against a whole bunch of users or a whole bunch of data that you have, if you can imagine with this slide 5 different solutions to do all of this, basically you as the customer become the integrator. And it gets very, very messy. Not all technologies have an ability to even make data discoverable, which means you've got to pull it out into an open format and go and discover it again. CommVault, coming back to that platform approach, gives you all of those capabilities in a single platform. We run on pretty much any infrastructure. We're completely infrastructure agnostic. We have lots and lots of vendor partners that we work with. And sure, we have some preferences, everybody does. But at the end of the day, if you meet our hardware and storage specifications, you can run, I said hardware, our infrastructure and storage specifications, you can pretty much run on any technology. Physical, virtual, hosted, and also in the cloud. Really powerful proposition. And then the last piece that Simpana content store. Having complete visibility of all of your data assets, regardless of their retention, regardless of whether they're located in your data center, in a third-party data center, and regardless of which tier of storage it's on, it's cataloged, it's managed, it's recoverable. Especially in the event of a crisis, having that kind of capability and not having to have the person with the intel and the IP that knows, oh, actually, that data I require for this is over here. It's a big value proposition just to simply come in and say, I need this data from this date and recover it to there, and automate all of that process away. So that's effectively everything I had in this presentation. We've got a couple of minutes left, and I'd be more than happy to take a couple of questions. If we don't get through them all, then please come and visit us at the CommVault booth. We'll start over here.
So you mentioned it briefly in the beginning, so it's almost interoperability, right? So our audit department has a concern, although it would be very unlikely, we also shut selection.
Yep.
So we're going to be 100% dedicated to the cloud, right?
Yep.
So we want to be able to take that data and port it to somewhere else.
Yes.
Microsoft,
sure.
Do you have any other customers that have that same concern and or use case?
Sure. In fact, we've got, it'd be inappropriate to mention them by name, but we've got customers and even some service providers. We've got service providers who offer managed services that are 100% deployed in the public cloud. And the reason that they've done that, they want to get out of the infrastructure game. But most importantly, they want to get out of the lifecycle game, right? So for them, one of the large global service providers that we work with, they have a deployment across AWS and Azure. They manage assets across both of them. Yeah, it's a really powerful proposition. Yeah, sure. Over here.
What's your experience with customers with a direct connect? Would they still need that physical cache if they've got low latency linked into AWS?
Yeah, it really depends on your recovery requirements, to be honest, because if every recovery, direct connect it gives you advantages. It's, in a lot of cases, it's land speed WAN, but it's still to wholesale move potentially terabytes of data over any connection, over that kind of network connection, plus things like egress and those kind of costs need to be factored in. So it's not to say it's not possible. If you have that kind of infrastructure, it's more realistic, but it really depends on your recovery requirements.
You mentioned multi-stream, but no mux. Does that mean I can lease more than one channel?
Sorry?
You mentioned multi-stream and no mux, no multiplex. So that means I can lease more than one channel?
Not necessarily, no. That's all handled by CommVault. We can still do multiplexing, but what I was really saying there was the traditional approach was only to turn on multiplexing. We've had the ability to multiplex and or multi-stream pretty much since the early days of our software. So yeah, we also have an ability to do some network throttling on our side. So if you provide a certain amount of bandwidth available to us, but only want us to consume a certain amount, we can clamp that down and just leverage the amount of bandwidth that's being provided. 2 minutes, thank you.
For my AMIs, do I have agent-based or snap-based? And do you use the snapshots that AWS creates, or do you do your own, and do you work with them?
Yeah, good question. So we, like our IntelliSnap program that I mentioned with all of the hardware arrays, we leave the snapshots in their native format, right? So we're more of an orchestration and management layer in that sense than putting the snapshots in our own proprietary format. Okay, so we leave those snaps open. We're coordinating and managing those snapshots. We do have a whole roadmap tied to that to go and do various other things, but today it's create, manage, tear them down based on a lease, destroy them, those kind of things. It's that level of control. The agent-based or snapshot-based is really a choice based on the type of protection that you're looking for or you require, right? So remember, a snapshot is volume or instance-based. It's a wholesale kind of mechanism, whereas the agent gives you a lot more granular control. It gives you the ability to pick out individual files without having to go and mount a snapshot. There's different recovery types for different use cases. So for some people, just taking a snapshot is enough and they'll recover from that snap. It depends on the value of the data. But if you've got data that needs longer term retention, break outside of that snapshot cycle and protected to a typically more cost effective tier of storage, that's where you're going to leverage the agent-based capability.
So if I'm using an LVM, I'm spread across multiple EBS volumes, database across,
Yep.
You help me with that?
In that sense, we're tied back to the host from that perspective. If you've got, especially an application, we would typically recommend in that instance, you'd use the snap to protect the actual machine itself, and you would use one of our application agents to actually integrate with the application and protect it effectively. Yeah.
There is an area out in the foyer.
Yep.
Which will be open for you to take questions.
Perfect.
Okay, because the fire marshal is about to close us down.
Don't upset the fire marshal. So, thanks everyone. I'll head down to that area and we can cover a few more off.